The Mindset Advantage, a podcast by Arcadia Consulting, architects of change.
As individuals and teams get past the initial shock of change and beyond the resilient coping phase, we look to them to build new responses, adopt new behaviours, innovate, and create new value and better results. This demands a fundamental belief in a growth mindset. In this episode, Cachet Prescott is joined by Matt Worsdall to explain why leaders need to promote a culture of learning, experimentation, innovation, and continuous improvement.
Hello, my name is Cachet Prescott, and I am a client director in the North American region of Arcadia Consulting. And I want to welcome you all today to our podcast where we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, which is growth mindset. And joining me today is one of our team members in the EMEA region, and his name is Matt Worsdall. Matt, how are you today?
Hi, Cachet. Great to be here. Thanks very much. As Cachet said, my name's Matt, and I work here in the EMEA region. And similar to Cachet, have a real passion for all things mindset, personal development, and personal growth. So it's great to be here today to have this conversation with you.
Awesome. I am so looking forward to taking a deep dive into this particular topic because it's such an important area when we think about this conversation related to change and what that looks like and the whole conversation about the change curve. So first and foremost, before we even jump into the conversation, can you tell me a bit about what growth mindset is? You know, we hear it often, but what is it?
Sure. Well, I'll try my best to answer that. So growth mindset, effectively, it was a term coined by Stanford professor Carol Dweck, and she did a study on various aspects of, I suppose, human life, work, education, sports, relationships even, and coined this term growth mindset. When she talks about mindset, what she's effectively talking about is the fundamental belief that we have and demonstrate around our ability to develop and improve. And also, our beliefs around other people's abilities to develop and improve. So obviously, for example, a parent and their child, how much do parents believe that their children can develop through effort and hard work? So with a fixed mindset, which I suppose is the enemy of growth mindset, for want of a better phrase, with a fixed mindset, we believe that our current performance is a measure of our ultimate potential. So the danger here is when we think about things like, exam results or past achievements, if we believe that is kind of locked and that we can't improve, it will deter us to work and try harder to get better. Conversely, growth mindset is all about past performance or even current performance is not an indicator of future potential. And therefore, with effort, we can build talent and we can build better improvement and results. And typically where we see these show up, fixed mindset isn't really a problem until things go wrong. So, we can have a fixed mindset and not realize it. But then, at Arcadia, we talk about, I suppose, 6 things that are likely to reveal the kind of mindset you may have. So these are things like challenges, obstacles, how we view effort, how we view the development of skill, how well do we receive and give feedback, and also how do we feel about other people when they are successful. Now, we may not be fixed mindset all the time, we may not be growth mindset all the time, but these 6 measures kind of give us an idea of where our mindset is at, and we can kind of measure often against those 6 factors.
So this makes complete sense in our conversation about change, because as you said, those 6 factors, challenge is definitely a part of the change curve, and obstacles definitely come into play during that conversation. So, when we're talking to leaders, why is it such an important thing for us to really hone in on this concept of growth mindset, particularly in relation to change?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think really, without having effectively a growth mindset is almost, a strategy for change, in times when change takes place. With a growth mindset, we can adapt to that change far more easily. We use tools like win, learn, change. I'm sure that's something that you've heard of before, where we start thinking about, in any change situation, or we've got ourselves a goal, what are our wins, what are our learns, and what are our changes, and how we reflect on these things.
Sure.
So when it comes to change itself, I think, leaders need to kind of walk the talk in terms of, are they demonstrating a growth mindset? Because that will empower, their teams to do the same. And obviously it's very, very hard. I mean, I guess the clue is almost in the title. It's very hard to change with a fixed mindset. Fixed mindset equals fixed results, I guess. So in order to grow and change, that growth mindset is really that key that unlocks that ability.
So growth mindset, oftentimes when people think of it, they sometimes, confuse it with other parts of, what we identify in the change curve, for instance, resilience or well-being. How is growth mindset, different from or even related to those other concepts?
Yeah, sure. So this is obviously, this is kind of, I guess, open for academic debate. We have a view on it, and you would have seen in our paper, The Mindset Advantage, how we try and kind of carve it up. So in a nutshell, resilience is really about absorbing pressure in a moment and coping. So we're not really at this stage, we're kind of just getting by. We're not necessarily talking about growth and improvement. Pandemic, I know it's a common used example at the moment for obvious reasons, but, that early stage of just trying to kind of, be okay, I suppose where that resilience comes in, it's absorbing pressure, coping with it, and almost preserving current state, being able to kind of ping back, to kind of where you were before. Growth mindset will help with that, because obviously within that, there's a level of effort that is required. And growth mindset, as we said at the beginning, is all about putting effort in to achieve results. So in order to cope, especially when things are really challenging, there is a level of effort that's required. What growth mindset is about is absorbing the pressure and using the challenge in a better situation than you were before. So one of the things we always talk about is feedback, or, the common phrase, learn, not lose. No such thing as failure. Everything is a learning experience. So, when things don't go to plan, how well are we able to frame that situation in a way which is absolutely helpful for us, so we can learn from it, we can improve, and, again, the clue is in the title, this source of growth. Use these situations as a source of growth and a way to improve. And then finally, there's, I guess, the third element, which kind of fits within our Mindset Advantage paper, which is the thriving under pressure. And that kind of, with mindset, it almost pumps it up a bit to another level, where we actually say, we've got a strategy now to cope with challenge and cope with setbacks. Mm-hmm. So not only can we deal with it, we actually now embrace it. So we seek pressure to make us perform better. And that's kind of the final layer. So it's kind of, we start with resilience, growth mindset, and then obviously thriving under pressure is when we've got this growth mindset strategy. Now, how can we really leverage it to turn up the dials and use pressure to really accelerate us?
Okay, that makes complete sense. So they're interrelated, not necessarily the same concepts, but they're related.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have another question for you. In terms of fixed versus growth mindset, how does that typically tend to show up in individuals or teams or organizations? We do a lot of work with various clients and organizations. How are some ways you see this showing up amongst the team members?
Yeah, sure. So I think sometimes it's really obvious, and sometimes it isn't. And I think the obvious examples are easy to spot. If people get bad feedback, or they get, I think even that on me is probably a bit of fixed mindset. There's no such thing as bad feedback. Sorry. If people receive feedback, how do they take that feedback? Do they see it as almost a condemnation of their being, or they see it as a opportunity to learn and do something with it? So that is really fairly obvious. When it comes to organizations, it can sometimes be more confusing, because sometimes we find we can create fixed mindset in people without meaning to. For example, overpraising people, giving people the idea that they're gifted, rewarding just the result and not recognizing the effort that goes into the result. We can overpraise people. And as we said right at the beginning of the call, fixed mindset's fine until it isn't. And then, somebody who believes in their mind that they're gifted or they're talented, or, which are terms we kind of don't really reject, because we do reject, because we believe that with effort and hard work, anyone can be talented. We build our talent through effort. Talent and effort are not opposing forces. Actually, one leads to the other. But if you have a culture where people believe that they're gifted, or some people have got it and some people haven't, for the people who believe they haven't, obviously you can understand that being very demotivating. They probably won't work hard. They probably won't realize their potential, and ultimately they may leave. And those, again, who believe they're gifted become very complacent. So actually, in terms of organizations and cultures, it's really important that we recognize and praise effort as well as just talent. Because otherwise, and also the other thing, just to say on that, is, people sometimes, because with a fixed mindset, we believe that our current performance is a measure of our ultimate potential. Times we are frightened that we reveal, it's almost the fear of exposure. So it's not just about being scared of failing, it's being scared of finding their limit. So everyone in the company thinks I'm, gifted and talented. Now, if I do something wrong and I look, like a failure, I've shown actually that this is all I've got. And again, so that can also, as you can imagine, be quite a toxic mindset to have with a team. And it stops people taking initiative. It stops people wanting to change. It stops people collaborating. All these good things that we want to see in teams and organizations we work with. With that fixed mindset, I suppose, contagion, it can really have a negative impact on the culture.
So when it comes to this idea of growth mindset, it's something that people really need to some degree have a level of self-awareness. And so if that is the case, how do we measure, where we stand on this idea of growth mindset versus a fixed mindset? There's the saying, what gets measured gets managed. So how do we do that personally? How do we measure where we stand in terms of that growth mindset?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, in answer to that, the first step really is, before we can measure or manage it, I think there's, as you said a second ago, it's about self-awareness, isn't it? And recognizing that, because we've all got a fixed mindset voice. We've all got it, So trying to deny your fixed mindset is almost a thankless task. The challenge is to, when the fixed mindset kicks in, is to recognize it. And we do a lot of work around self-talk, inner dialogue. And the question we always ask people is your inner voice your inner coach, or is it your inner critic? Dialogue, internal and external dialogue, is almost like a real-time pulse check of our mindset. So raising self-awareness, accepting we have a fixed mindset voice in us, we all do, and almost training it to behave itself, and not creep in, when you've been, asked to do something work you haven't done before, or if you find a challenge in your personal life, recognizing when that fixed mindset comes in and trying to train it and move it towards a more growth mindset, using growth language, thinking about, effort, and with hard work and effort, we can, create a situation where we improve and change things. And there are also, there are tools we use. We use with our clients, we use assessments, so self-assessments, where we get people to, be honest with themselves and ask, I suppose, some fairly difficult questions. Obviously with these things, the more honest you are, the better. Ask them to self-assess, in a situation where you're faced with a challenge, what's your response? And then we can build a picture that way of where people sit on that fixed to growth spectrum.
So it sounds like this is a muscle that we need to continuously build.
Sure. Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it.
So when it comes to the organization in and of itself and trying to develop a growth mindset culture, what can leaders do to really develop that growth mindset within themselves and in those around them, their team members and, the people that really are the driving force of the organization? How do you really set the tone for developing a growth mindset culture? Yeah,
it's a great question, Cachet. It's really funny because often, we get asked as Arcadia, as you know, to go into organizations and speak to their people about mindset. And some of the time, we will have leaders who come to us and say, my team need growth mindset, but quite often they need growth mindset as well. So I think the first step is again, as you mentioned earlier, was about the self-awareness piece. So, noticing your own response to obstacles, challenges, noticing when does your fixed mindset come in, and allowing that to be called out. This is really about walking the talk. If one of your team members calls you out and says, I think you're showing a fixed mindset there, chances are you probably are. So being open to that feedback, in the spirit of what growth mindset is all about. Somebody calls you out and says, I think you're showing some fixed mindset here. Take that feedback as a gift, take heed, do something with it. So that self-awareness piece for leaders in the first instance is really important. Obviously, feedback from others, but also their own inner dialogue too. So before you can create a culture of growth mindset, you really have to master your own. So you have to listen to your own inner voice, recognize when your own fixed mindset kicks in, and also listen out, keep your ears open. Once you've kind of self-mastery, I suppose, is step one. And then step two really is keep your ears and eyes open. When do you see fixed mindset behaviors amongst your team and organizations? That might be, examples could include things like limiting beliefs. So people, doubting their ability based on, I'm bad at presentations. Why? Because I did a bad presentation 2 years ago. This kind of fixed mindset, which completely denies the possibility of being able to improve. Excuses, blame culture, all these kind of things, I suppose, would indicate a fixed mindset culture within a team or organization. So strategy to overcome that, I think we mentioned this earlier, would be, the win, learn, change culture. So this is all about a feedback culture, which is all focused on continuous improvement. So wins are great. They're good for self-belief, but actually the learns, when things don't go so well, they're not failures. These are opportunities to reflect, learn and grow. And obviously then the changes that follow that are based on those two factors. Mentioned it already, really, really important to, recognize effort as well as results. So obviously, we need to be serious and realistic. Obviously, a lot of organizations are driven by results. We get that. But it's not the be all and end all. Rewarding effort, hard work, ambition, mindset, all of that stuff. It's really, really important that people, remain motivated. And if you're only praising or recognizing the kind of what people see as top performers all the time, it can create, quite a bad place for those who are really, really trying. And ultimately, people who could have a lot of potential, disengage. One of the stories Carol Dweck uses in her book, which I really like, is around the hare and the tortoise. And, I think generally in pop culture, people look at it quite fondly. But she had quite a scathing review of it. And so her take was, it kind of gives the impression that hard work and effort only pays off when talented people drop the ball. So, in that story, you've got the hare who's flying ahead, being, complacent. He sits down for a nap. And obviously the tortoise then overtakes and wins the race. Now, the message she takes from that is, well, look, if the hare hadn't had us, sat down and had a sleep, then the tortoise would have won. So it does. I guess it's an argument which you could look at either way. But it's interesting to see, and I do see it in there. Again, one of the things we've really, really got to be really clear on is you're not seeing, ability and effort as two separate things. We build ability and we build effort. Build talent and ability through effort. So it's not one or other. So I think that's really important, and that kind of ties back into everything we said around not just rewarding top performers all the time, and actually recognizing effort and hard work as well. And I think finally, just in terms of what can leaders do to help create cultures of growth mindset. Celebrate the quick wins. When things are celebrated, call people out. For good behavior and good results and for working hard. And hopefully all of these things together, help create this culture of growth mindset.
Well, Matt, you have certainly given our listeners a lot to think about in terms of this conversation about growth mindset. And of course, we could probably talk about this for hours on end. But I want to thank you for your time and thank you for just your thoughts on this important topic, particularly in relation to the conversations about change and what that looks like within organizations. And I also want to thank our listeners for listening in and joining us for the Mindset Advantage podcast series. And we look forward to you listening in on the next conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Cachet. Thanks, everyone.
You've been listening to The Mindset Advantage. Follow Arcadia Consulting on social media platforms to stay updated.